Nathan looked down, annoyance flashing briefly across his face before softening at the sight. He hesitated. His phone still pressed to his ear, but something in Emma's wide, expectant eyes made him lower it slowly. His security guards immediately tensed, stepping closer, but he gave them a slight wave, signaling them to hold off. "Hello there," he said, his voice smooth but edged with curiosity. "Are you lost?" Emma shook her head, her small fingers still gripping the fabric of his expensive jacket. Up close, he looked just like he did in the photographs, just older, with a few faint lines around his eyes. Her mother's voice was growing closer now, tinged with alarm, but Emma didn't turn around. "You know my mom," she stated plainly, her voice unwavering. Nathan blinked. He had expected a request for an autograph or some wide-eyed admiration. Children often recognize him from television, but this was different. His gaze flickered over the girl's features, taking in her dark brown eyes, the soft curl of her hair, the slight tilt of her nose. Something about her felt familiar. "I do," he asked carefully, crouching slightly to meet her at eye level. Emma nodded. "Olivia Carter." At that moment, Olivia's voice cut through the noise. "Emma." Nathan stood abruptly, turning just as Olivia broke through the crowd. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting between her daughter and the man in front of her. For a brief second, time seemed to stop. Olivia's breath caught her throat as she met Nathan's gaze. It had been over a decade since she had last seen him, but the years hadn't erased the memories. They hadn't erased him. Nathan, however, looked equally stunned. His expression, once composed and unreadable, now flickered with something else: recognition, disbelief, and something deeper. The security guards, sensing the sudden tension, stepped forward protectively, but Nathan lifted a hand, stopping them again. He stared at Olivia as if seeing a ghost, and for the first time in years, words failed him. Emma, standing between them, glanced back and forth, sensing the weight of the silence. She didn't fully understand complexities of the moment, but she knew something important had just happened. Then, in a voice that was both innocent and unshakably certain, she looked up at Nathan and asked, "Are you my dad?" She sighed, smoothing Emma's unruly curls as she searched for the right words. "It's complicated, sweetheart." Emma frowned. "That's what you always say when you don't want to answer." Olivia let out a quiet chuckle, but it was tinged with sadness. She had always known this moment would come. The day Emma would start asking questions she couldn't keep dodging, but she had hoped for more time. Emma sat up, her bright green eyes, the very ones Olivia used to get lost in when she looked at Nathan, filled with stubborn determination. "Is he my dad?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. Olivia's throat tightened, and for a moment she considered lying. It would be easier, wouldn't it, to shield Emma from the truth, to keep their carefully built life untouched by the chaos Nathan Sinclair could bring. But Emma deserved more than half-truths and avoidance. Olivia inhaled deeply, her fingers intertwining with her daughter's small hands. "Yes." Emma's breath hitched. "Then why do we know him? Why don't I know him?" The innocence in her voice made Olivia's heart ache. How could she explain something so tangled, so painful? "Nathan, he and I had different lives," Olivia said carefully. "A long time ago, we loved each other. But sometimes love isn't enough." Emma processed this for a moment, then asked, "Did he know about me?" Olivia looked away, guilt flashing across her face. "No." Emma's eyes widened. "You never told him?" Olivia shook her head. "I thought it was the right thing at the time." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Emma, usually so full of chatter and boundless curiosity, simply stared at her mother as if seeing her for the first time. After a long pause, she whispered, "Will you tell him now?" Tears burned behind Olivia's eyes. She had spent years keeping her past locked away, convinced that facing it would only bring pain. But now, looking at the child she had raised on her own, she wondered if she had been wrong. "I don't know," Olivia admitted softly, "but I think it might be time." Emma squeezed her mother's hand. "I think so, too." Nathan didn't turn away from the window. His reflection stared back at him, A man who had spent years building an empire, but suddenly felt as if he were standing on unsteady ground. Let them be concerned. For the first time in his life, business didn't feel like the most pressing thing in his world. "Tell them I'll handle it," he said, his voice measured but distant. Vanessa hesitated. As his assistant for the past 5 years, she had seen him juggle billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But this was different. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere far from boardrooms and stock prices. "Sir," she said carefully, stepping further inside, "I don't mean to overstep, but you haven't been yourself these past few days. If something is wrong, perhaps—" Nathan finally turned, pinning her with sharp, unreadable gaze. "It's personal." Vanessa nodded, sensing the boundaries. Understood. She started to leave, but before she could step through the door, Nathan spoke again. "Vanessa, I need you to find someone for me." She turned back, pulling out her tablet. "Of course." "Who?" Nathan hesitated for only a fraction of a second before saying, "Olivia Carter." There it was, the name he hadn't spoken in years, and yet it tasted so familiar on his tongue. Vanessa's fingers hovered over the screen. It wasn't often that her boss asked for personal searches, and certainly not for a woman. She had never heard the name before, but the way he said it, low and almost reverent, told her this wasn't just anyone. "Do you have an address?" she asked. Nathan exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. "No, but she has a daughter, Emma." Vanessa made a note. "Age? 8. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, realization dawning in her sharp gaze. But she didn't press. "I'll see what I can find." Nathan nodded, turning back to the window as Vanessa exited. He had spent years burying the past beneath success and ambition, convincing himself that some chapters were best left closed. But one look into Emma's green eyes had shattered that illusion. He needed answers. And more than that, he needed to know the truth Olivia had kept from him all these years. Nathan let out a humorless chuckle, rubbing his temple. "You think she'd actually pick up?" Daniel was silent for a beat. "Probably not." "Exactly." Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "She ran from me once, Daniel, and now, after all these years, I find out she might have been running with my child." His jaw tightened. "I don't even know where to begin." "You begin by confirming the truth," Daniel said firmly. "Before you spiral into worst-case scenarios, you need to know for sure." Nathan's fingers drummed against his desk. "And if she is mine, then you decide what kind of father you want to be." The weight of that truth settled heavily on Nathan's shoulders. He had spent years believing Olivia had simply left because she wanted to. The idea that she had been carrying his child, that he had missed nearly a decade of his daughter's life, shook him to his core. "I don't even know how to approach her," Nathan admitted. "She wouldn't even let me speak in the park. She just grabbed Emma and left." "That was 3 days ago," Daniel pointed out. "Give her time. She's probably just as overwhelmed as you are." Nathan scoffed. "Somehow I doubt that." "Listen," Daniel continued, his voice softer now. "If Emma is yours, that means Olivia has been doing this alone for 8 years. You need to be prepared for the fact that she had her reasons for keeping you out of the picture. Whether you agree with them or not, she's still Emma's mother." Nathan pinched the bridge of his nose. "You think I don't know that?" Daniel sighed. "I'm just saying, go in with an open mind. Anger won't change the past. But maybe, just maybe, you still have a chance to be part of the future." Nathan didn't respond right away. He stared at the business card Olivia had taken from him in the park, wondering if she had even looked at it. "Yeah," he finally muttered. "Maybe." But deep down, he knew maybe wasn't good enough. He needed answers. And one way or another, he was going to get them. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Every possible response felt inadequate. She could lie. She could deflect, or she could finally tell him the truth. She had kept this secret for so long. Justified it. Convinced herself it was for the best. But looking at those 3 words on the screen, Olivia felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her chest. Her thumb brushed over the phone's surface, the cursor blinking expectantly. Yes, 1 word. That was all it would take to shatter the fragile distance she had spent years maintaining, to bring Nathan crashing back into their lives. But could she handle that? Could Emma? She inhaled sharply and did the one thing she never thought she'd do. She turned off her phone. Across the city, Nathan sat at his desk, phone in hand, waiting. His jaw clenched when no response came. He checked his screen again. Nothing. A slow, burning frustration settled in his gut. He had given Olivia space. He had reached out civilly. Yet she was still shutting him out. He wouldn't accept that. Not this time. Nathan had spent his life taking control of impossible situations, turning obstacles into opportunities. This was no different. If Olivia wouldn't give him the truth, he would find another way to get it. And if Emma was his daughter, then nothing would stop him from being in her life. Before she could finish, a deep, familiar voice cut through the air. Sophie. Daniel Carter stood a few feet away, holding a coffee cup, his brow furrowed in confusion as he took in sight of the little girl standing at the reception desk. His morning had been routine, until now. Sophie turned, relief washing over her. "Mr. Carter, I need to talk to you." Daniel blinked, glancing at the receptionist, who simply shrugged. He set down his coffee, stepping closer. "What are you doing here? Does your mom know where you are?" She shook her head, clutching the straps of her backpack. "No, but I had to come." Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, let's go somewhere private." He led Sophie into a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He pulled out a chair for her before taking a seat across the table. "All right," he said gently. "Tell me what's going on." Sophie hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Are you my dad?" Daniel froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Of all the things he expected her to say, that hadn't even been on his radar. "Sophie," he began carefully, "why would you think that?" She reached into her backpack and pulled out a photo she had taken from her mother's album. It was an old picture, her mom and a young Daniel, arms wrapped around each other, smiling at the camera. "You were with my mom, and you have the same sweatshirt she sleeps in sometimes." Daniel stared at the photo, the air in the room growing impossibly heavy. "I looked at the dates," Sophie continued. "This picture is from 9 years ago, and I'm 8. She chewed her lip. "It makes sense, doesn't it?" Daniel let out a slow breath, realization dawning. Sophie wasn't confused about him. She had mixed him up with... "Sophie," he said gently, leaning forward, "I'm not your dad." She frowned. But I know who might be." Her eyes widened. "You do?" Daniel hesitated. It wasn't his place to reveal the truth. That was Olivia's decision. But as he looked at the eager, searching face of the little girl in front of him, he knew one thing for certain. She deserved answers. "Let me take you home," he said. "And I promise, everything is going to make sense soon." Minutes later, Olivia stormed through the glass doors of Hayes Technologies, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the receptionist greeting her. "Where is she?" she demanded, scanning the lobby. "Mr. Hayes is waiting for you in his office," the receptionist said smoothly, gesturing toward the elevators. "He asked me to escort you." But Olivia was already moving. When she reached the top floor, the door slid open to reveal a sleek executive suite. Nathaniel stood by the window, hands in his pockets, but it was the sight of Emma, sitting in one of the plush leather chairs, legs swinging nervously, that sent a fresh wave of panic through Olivia's veins. "Mom!" Emma jumped up, relief flashing across her face. Olivia crossed the room in seconds, kneeling to grip her daughter's arms. "Are you okay? What were you thinking, running off like that?" Emma glanced down, guilt creeping in. I needed to know." Olivia closed her eyes, exhaling sharply before standing and facing Nathaniel. "I told you not to say anything to her." His jaw tightened. "And I didn't. But Olivia, she's smart. She put the pieces together on her own." Olivia shook her head, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, fear, and something dangerously close to regret. "This isn't how I wanted this to happen." Nathaniel took a step closer, his voice low but firm. "Then how did you want it to happen?" Or were you planning on never telling me? Silence. Emma, standing between them, watched their tense exchange with wide eyes. So it's true, she whispered. Olivia swallowed hard, forcing herself to look at her daughter. Yes, baby. Nathaniel is your father. The room felt impossibly still. Emma turned to Nathaniel, searching his face for answers, for recognition. You really are my dad? Nathaniel knelt in front of her, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know, Emma. If I had... He glanced up at Olivia, a mixture of frustration and something softer in his gaze. I would have been here. Emma bit her lip. But do you want to be my dad now? Something in Nathaniel cracked wide open. He reached out, hesitating only for a moment before gently placing a hand on her shoulder. More than anything, tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she watched her daughter's face light up. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Because the hardest part wasn't the truth coming out. It was figuring out where they went from here. Both adults turned at the sound of Emma's small voice. The tension in the room was thick, heavy with unspoken words and years of lost time. But standing in the doorway, Emma looked oblivious to the storm that had just passed between them. She was only concerned about one thing. Nathaniel straightened, clearing his throat before offering her a small smile. Yeah, kiddo, we're done talking. Emma stepped inside, her gaze bouncing between them. So what happens now? Olivia swallowed hard, her fingers tightening into fists at her sides. That was the question neither of them had an easy answer to. Nathaniel exhaled and glanced at Olivia before turning back to Emma. Well, I'd like to get to know you, if that's okay with you. Emma studied him carefully, as if assessing whether she could trust him. Then, with the wisdom of a child, she asked, Are you going to disappear again? The question knocked the breath from Olivia's lungs, but Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He crouched down at Emma's level, looking her straight in the eyes. No, he said firmly. I won't go anywhere. I promise. Emma held his gaze for a moment longer before nodding. Okay. Nathaniel smiled, something warm and genuine crossing his face. Okay. Olivia watched them, her emotions in turmoil. This was what she had feared. The moment Emma would bond with Nathaniel, the moment she would no longer be just hers. But mixed with the fear was something unexpected, relief, because despite everything, Emma deserved this. Maybe we can start slow, Olivia said finally. Get lunch sometime. See how things go. Nathaniel nodded. That sounds fair. But there was something unreadable in his gaze when he looked at her, something that told Olivia he wasn't done fighting for more. Emma grinned. Can we get ice cream, too? Nathaniel chuckled. You drive a hard bargain, kid. But yeah, I think we can manage that. As Emma beamed, Olivia felt a shift, like the world they had built for 8 years was changing, opening up in ways she had never expected. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. Past still present, but no longer defining them. Olivia let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. Fine. Determination, then. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Emma laugh with her friends. It was hard to believe how much had changed in just 3 months. You know, Nathaniel said quietly, I used to think success meant building something great. A company. A legacy. He exhaled, eyes still on Emma. But I was wrong. Olivia turned to him, sensing the weight of his words. This, he continued, motioning toward their daughter. This is what matters. Being here, knowing her, knowing you again. Olivia's heart tightened. There was still so much between them. Pain, regret, things left unsaid, but there was also something undeniable. Possibility. She glanced at Nathaniel, her voice softer now. I was so afraid, she admitted. Afraid of what your mother could do. Afraid I'd be a burden. Afraid that telling you would change everything. It did change everything, Nathaniel said, but not in the way you feared. They met each other's gaze, years of emotions flickering between them. I don't know what this means for us, Olivia admitted, but I do know Emma needs you, and maybe I do too, just a little. Nathaniel smiled, reaching out to gently squeeze her hand. Then we'll figure it out. Together. And for the first time in years, Olivia believed they just might raise an eyebrow. At first, Emma grinned, completely undeterred. Yeah, like in those books we read, the ones where the prince and princess don't realize they love each other right away, but they always end up together in the end. Nathaniel let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. She really is your daughter. Olivia sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Emma, sweetheart, life isn't a fairy tale. Emma tilted her head, considering this. Maybe not, but it could be. She gave them both a meaningful look before skipping off, leaving them standing there, slightly stunned. Nathaniel turned to Olivia, a smirk playing at his lips. You have to admit, she makes a solid argument. Olivia rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. I blame you for this. She's picking up your negotiating skills. I take that as a compliment, Nathaniel said smoothly. Then, more seriously, she's right about one thing, families should be together. Olivia looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she let herself wonder, what if, maybe, just maybe, Emma wasn't the only one who still believed in happy endings. Emma's applause was quickly joined by the warm laughter and cheers of their closest friends and family. Nathaniel pulled Olivia closer, his forehead resting against hers, as they both took a deep breath. This was real. No more running. No more what-ifs. Just them. Together. The golden retriever puppy let out a playful bark, wagging his tail as Emma scooped him up proudly. I told you fairy tales are real, she declared, flashing a knowing grin at her parents. Nathaniel chuckled, glancing at Olivia. Remind me to never doubt her again. Olivia, happiness shining in her eyes, squeezed his hand. She is usually right. As the chapel doors opened, golden autumn leaves swirling the breeze, the newly formed family stepped out into the world, together. A love that had once been lost had found its way home again, and with Emma leading the way, there was no doubt that the best was yet to come. And yes, there was already a dog bed waiting in both apartments.